We've got a great panel today looking at the scale issue and fragmentation. Just introduce them quickly and we'll get right into it because we've got a lot of ground to cover. So first we have Tim Sims, who's the VP of Inventory Partnerships at The Trade Desk, Chris Paul, who's VP Media at Squarespace, and James Rooke, who is the Chief Revenue Officer at FreeWheel. So welcome, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So,
No, thank you. Nice.
not Flywheel. Okay, so let's do an all play, so just to get warmed up. Scale really at a really large scale. Is it really attainable in this world where we have such a murky morass between brands and publishers? Tim, can we start with you?
Yeah, I mean, I think for us, and just to give a little bit of context for those who don't know what we do at The Trade Desk, we're a multi-channel buy-side platform. We're generally lumped into the DSP category. So I think for us, the way that we kind of look at this, the hyper-fragmentation world, is really just about consolidating as many channels into one platform as possible. We hear this all the time. Our kind of major client set is agencies. And one of the complaints or kind of challenges that many of these agencies have in scaling their business and scaling the delivery of their customer, the marketer's message across all these multiple channels, is having to log into multiple systems. And so for us, to be able to consolidate that as much as possible into one place is really kind of our goal to help solve for the fragmentation.
James.
So from a FreeWheel standpoint, we represent a very specific set of clients, which is just the premium video clients, and represent about 90% of the TV programmers right now. There's three types of fragmentation that we're seeing. One is obvious, and that's viewer fragmentation. Secondly is measurement fragmentation. And then thirdly is actually technology fragmentation. So we'll dig into each of those. But on a most basic level, if you believe that the product that the publishers, the programmers are trying to sell is the content, rather than the screen itself, then what we're trying to solve for is enabling those programmers to be able to kind of reaggregate the audience by being able to unify their inventory regardless of the screen, because the screen and wire should be just treated as a detail, and enable them to work with the buy side so they can kind of plan, deliver, and ultimately invoice across screens, whether that's digital video, set-top box VOD, or ultimately linear, because that's the only way you're going to get scale. And if you believe that premium video is scarce by nature, then that's just necessary.
So what I do is I actually still a media buyer. I buy all the media for Squarespace and basically look after the growth in our customer acquisition. So the problems that these guys, I mean, I would say technology kind of created the problem of fragmentation, but it's also, interestingly, the solution to it, as these guys will tell you. I think it's absolutely possible to address audiences at scale, but it's now an audience issue much more than it is a platform issue. If technology can help us actually break through on aggregating and identifying audiences and hitting those same audiences with the right frequency to create an action, then we'll have done our jobs and we'll have used the available technology for what it's for. But it is largely a matter for the buy side of continuing to piece together those platforms and the technologies that get us closer to the answer. So consolidation in any way, whether it's buying or helping the publisher side, whatever it might be, is absolutely a boon for the buy side.
James, talk about, you mentioned measurement, but there's all sorts of capabilities that have to be federated. Talk about how that's coming and where it's going, and why is it so important?
So if you work under the underlying premise that to get scale on premium stuff, you have to be able to unify inventory and make it available to sell across platforms, again, the screen and wire being the detail, then that tells you that you need to be able to likely stitch together different ways to measure, because right now we're not in a world where there is a single measurement provider that can provide a clear, transparent view across all platforms. And I don't know what the future will hold and whether the dominant player on the linear side will become dominant across all screens, but we're working under an assumption that that won't be the case, and that there will likely be a small number of players that will need to get stitched together in order to enable a scaled buy to take place, whereby there's fair transparency in terms of what that actual kind of transaction metric is. And the other reason we believe that is because I think the use of proprietary data by the buy side is going to become, and it already is, increasingly important, where large brand marketers are saying to our publishers, I want to use my client list, I want to use my proprietary data to be able to reserve inventory with you or buy your inventory. So that needs to be taken into account also.
Chris, from your perspective, what are some of the really underlying pain points that need to be addressed quickly?
So for a long time, the issue has been we have so much to measure, and we have a hard time picking out what are actually those performance indicators that are key. What are the ones that actually are the best indicators of future business performance? I was having this conversation with our head of strategy not too long ago. As Squarespace is about to move to a place where we hadn't been before, thinking of expanding the product offering, we believe that there are probably different acquisition costs depending on what kind of product you're looking to buy. More sophisticated, website builders, commerce clients, things like that are probably a little bit tougher to nail down. And he said to me, well, we have a marketing spend. How do we actually know if we're spending money and people coming in through different channels? They arrive at the site through paid search, but they may then see a video. They may convert sometime later. How do we handle attribution? And then how do we actually chunk out what was the actual cost to bring in that new customer if we know that we're actually hitting them so many times across so many different places? I think it's attribution is probably the biggest issue for the advertisers and the buy side to help make full use of the technology and the analytics capabilities that are out there.
Have there been any sort of really near-term advances in that attribution question that you could talk about?
I mean, for the most part, I think it's more people are actually recognizing how complicated this is, and I think more people are looking back at old measures of even ad delivery and recognition of new client acquisition or customer acquisition as being outdated at this point. And I think that recognition is inspiring new entrants into the marketplace to try to do it better, to try to use different sources of data to possibly piece together what the actual journey was for the consumer to get from point A to point B. So I'm glad that we're kind of recognizing what we don't know. And that's creating an opportunity for new entrants and new thinking.
Tim, talk to us a little bit about vendor fatigue. I mean, just north of half of publishers have 30 plus vendors or something. That's right. Like logo soup. How do you face that?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough. I mean, you mentioned murkiness kind of at the front of your question before, and there's a lot of murkiness. It's a confusing space, right? We have a lot of people who do something that sounds kind of similar, right? If you walk up to, if you flip a coin and walk up to somebody's booth at Demexco, everybody kind of sounds like they're doing the same thing. That's really confusing for publishers. It's confusing for buyers. And one of the biggest compliments that I got a couple of times, just speaking about Demexco, was talking to a few of our supply vendors there. They said, what's great about you guys? I really understand what you do. And so that's a great compliment because while our business, at least on the buy side, is kind of complex in its details, our business at The Trade is relatively simple, right? We're a platform for buyers, right? We want to make sure that we're stitching all of this together as seamlessly and easy as possible so that you can run and deliver a media campaign across display and mobile and video, our new advanced TV product and other channels coming in the future, whether it's digital audio or digital out of home, and all of these other things that are delivered through an internet-connected device can ultimately be stitched together. We're still in early days in some of those channels, but I think creating simplicity around what you're offering is really refreshing to people, both on the buy and the sell side. And so that's why us as this kind of pure play buy side platform work really well with people like FreeWheel and PubMatic and others to help piece all this together and hopefully remove some of the confusion and clutter.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're already down the path of a serious shakeout. There's too many companies chasing too few dollars. Which is why everyone's now going after programmatic TV, because it's a $75 billion market. But I think once a lot of the arguably nefarious activity got exposed last year with all the fraud challenges, I think that opened the eyes even more broadly of the brand marketers who are saying, hey, what am I actually buying from all these Lumos-like participants and who's doing what. And I think it also opened the eyes of the publishers to ask tougher questions. And I think what we're seeing is absolutely consolidation in terms of, at least from our client base, wanting to work with less players.
Yep.
Number two, wanting to work with players whose business models are really clear and whose business models are aligned from an incentive standpoint with what their business is. And I think that's causing a lot of shakeout because there's a number of players who are managing both the buy side and the sell side. And so the question is, you're being paid out of both pockets. That becomes challenging. So I think we're at the start of seeing serious consolidation.
Do you have any examples of either brands or publishers who've come up with creative solutions that have sort of gotten past that sort of initial shock and have sort of found ways to almost hack this?
Yeah, I think that from a FreeWheel standpoint, being that we're their ad decisioning, their ad server, I guess, their ad decisioning platform, the ask to us is really simple. It's like, hey, we want to work more and more, this is the publisher speaking, we want to work more and more with the largest brands directly or with the largest agencies directly, and we want you to integrate in directly to the platform that they log into every day, the demand-side platform, and we just want to make our inventory available under business models that actually protect the integrity of our premium stuff. At a highest level, that's what they're asking to do. On the other side, the brands are saying, hey, I just want to be able to access premium inventory because once all the fraud stuff got exposed, actually audience plus quality content viewed in a good, safe context does matter, which is why OTT and set-top box become so important. So I think both sides are saying the same thing, and there's an opportunity to rise the tides for both. There's all this mess in the middle. One good example is, Allstate, I think, is very progressive in this sense, and they're wanting to work with our publishers and use their proprietary data sets, and they're saying, hey, I'm willing to buy your inventory in advance against my proprietary data set, but I'll do it under a model whereby my buy-side AdTech provider, so a DSP, so a trade desk or TubeMogul or a Videology, I'm not going to let them look at your inventory because I know you're fearful of that, as long as you don't get to look at my data. So there's fair trading going on where actually common sense is prevailing. And I know Allstate's done some campaigns where they're saying 50% lift in their brand metrics because they're buying quality content against their data in safe environments, and it's actually working.
Do you think it's a question of collaboration and sort of being able to have that trust to sort of let go a little bit in order to be ultimately protected?
Well, for me, it was always, and I talked to the IAB about this a few years ago. I think a lot of it has to do with brands, and I put the call out to the brands to recognize that when the price of inventory looks too good to be true, it probably is. And forcing your agencies and forcing your tech partners down on the CPM is generally only feeding the bad actors. That's natural. So understanding that the value of the inventory does come at a cost, and you can recognize still tremendous savings versus what you may have done before by buying in a programmatic environment, then just kind of split the difference there and realize that you will see better outcomes. I saw it myself when I was on the agency side with the Amex business years ago. We just did a sort of head-to-head test with pure audience buying versus contextual buying, and surprised myself that the contextual buying in many ways, even on the most hardcore direct response efficiency metrics, outperformed. And I think that, to the point made earlier, you have to find that happy marriage of context and audience. The audience piece to negate the fragmentation, the context piece to ensure that you're getting the right quality, and you have to be prepared for a price that's commensurate with what the value you're getting.
Tim, how do you see the entrance, the real entrance of television video into this equation, and how is it going to scrub up some of the bad players, or how is it going to affect the business?
I think to the second point there, is it going to scrub up the business? I think James made some good points, right? Like if you look at the kind of makeup of FreeWheel's marketplace and other kind of premium video marketplaces, you have an extremely premium publisher environment, right? And so that in and of itself has kind of scrubbed up the business because you've got a transparent model where you say, here's a handful of really premium publishers looking to create a relationship with buyers and transact through transparent pipes. I think that's the basis of a good marriage right there. As far as like the kind of entrance of TV, like there's a broad spectrum there when you talk about programmatic TV, and you said this earlier, programmatic TV gets a ton of word count, and a lot of people are kind of huddling under that umbrella right now and saying, oh yeah, we do that too, but it's a really, really complex and broad spectrum, right? On one side, you've got stuff that looks a lot like what we do in programmatic today. You've got premium video delivered in a browser-based environment on a desktop computer. You've got, moving further down the continuum, OTT, then you've got addressable, you have VOD somewhere in there, and then all the way at the other end you've got linear. And so programmatic means different things at every stage along that continuum. And I think the stuff that is happening kind of on the further left-hand side of that continuum is very here and now, and we're doing a lot of that stuff today. But further out on the linear side, we have some partnerships, so there's a lot to do there. And programmatic takes on a much different meaning. It doesn't necessarily mean auction. It means automation, and it means other things around just creating, hopefully, some efficiencies in the process by which that gets bought and sold. But that is the biggest piece of the media pie, right? It's half or 50, 60% of the total media pie. So there's a lot of people out there chasing that. But I think programmatic is going to mean a lot of different things to the people along that continuum.
So how fast till it reaches any sort of scale? Decade?
Again, I think it depends on how and where you kind of define it. I mean, I think you can read a lot of different research reports. We sponsored some research on this, a couple of months ago, and it's definitely going to accelerate. And if you count automation as part of programmatic, I think there's a huge upside here. If we can smooth out the process to buy local affiliate broadcast inventory, for example, and that gets kind of lumped into programmatic, absolutely, there's tons of upside. It's a huge market in spot and scatter, and so that's a huge opportunity. And then on the left-hand side of the continuum, that stuff's happening now, right? Like the stuff that FreeWheel's doing and the stuff that the OTT providers are doing, that's here and now, and there's budgets there today.
Yeah, I think the speed of it will be partly defined by how quickly the right business models get put in place under which linear television gets transacted. Because a lot of the fear, rightfully so, of the programmers is like, hey, I see all this stuff happening in digital video, and its legacy is coming from display, which I don't necessarily think is the right model for premium video. And now I'm fearful that there are these 400 companies from the Luma slide coming after my 75 billion, and I know that their goal is not necessarily aligned with mine. So I'm going to passively resist, and I'm going to be driven by rightful fear. Now, if there's a good business model in place whereby, again, a brand wants to use their data, very fair request, right, where my inventory doesn't have buy-side technology crawling all over it and stealing my data. Very fair request. If we can come to a point where business models between the biggest guys on the buy side and the sell side, I think we can move the needle.
How far away are we from that?
I think we're a long way. It ties to my earlier point about some of the mess getting cleared out in the middle. I think that process has absolutely started, which is great, but I don't believe that the programmers are going to put that market at risk, and they're not going to have their hands forced, and rightfully so. And they've got to lead with business model.
I mean, I've seen it firsthand with the MSOs, like cable companies, kind of interpreting what we're talking about with addressability to mean increasingly local. And then the local sellers and the local selling organizations say, you're not coming to cannibalize my business. I get great CPMs for this stuff. Don't touch it. And I think part of it is trying to change the conversation to say what we mean by addressable is actually buying a national spot, but varying the creative by household based on what we know about those people. So it's actually potentially adding value to a national buy, but getting that level of addressability and that level of relevance that the marketer is looking for.
You mentioned satellite in our pre-interviews
Yep.
as an interesting place for cues.
And they seem to be moving far faster than the rest of the marketplace. I give them a lot of credit. The DirecTVs and the Dish folks.
Maybe just sort of walk us through how they're so far out ahead. Or why?
I asked the question for the people with the folks I was talking to, and I didn't really get a satisfactory answer. So I want to try to dig a little deeper. But it does seem like either they're unencumbered by some of the issues that are facing the cable-based MSOs. It could be the fact that they don't have local sales organizations that are necessarily as worried about what we're talking about. They also seem to be able to offer better data integrations, first party in many cases, and they have talked about third party data in others. So the why, I wish I could expound upon, but it does seem like they're recognizing the opportunity and moving quickly.
Yeah, I actually think one area that's interesting to watch is set-top box video on demand, because that inventory is now being lit up and able to be dynamically add and served into and the set-top box is being treated just like an iPad or a desktop for the first time, and that's great. The reason I think it's interesting is because what you can do in a set-top box environment is incredibly limited relative to what you can do in a browser environment. So cookies don't work in set-top box environments. The creative asset, the mezzanine file, has to be uploaded to the head end 3 days before the campaign runs, because if not, then people start calling 1-800 Time Warner Cable and saying my VOD stream is broken. And then that causes consumer experiences issues, which put the advertising dollars as a side conversation.
Right.
So actually, I think that's interesting, because there are ways in which the demand-side platforms can start to, I think, access that inventory. And there's ways in which data can be applied to that inventory. But because of the limitations of the environment, I think it will help the industry create good business rules that will stop bad things from browser environments bleeding in to VOD and then ultimately linear environments.
Yeah, there's definitely a re-education process on a lot of this too for folks who use platforms. So the buying groups that today would typically be a customer of a DSP platform, when you talk about stuff like VOD or down onto linear, this is a totally different thing for the kind of customer today of a DSP. So someone who's logging into a platform today at an agency to execute campaigns, when they look across these channels, it's a very different thing. Like this idea that I have to wait 3 days for my creative to get uploaded, like that's a foreign concept. But so there's a re-education process as we go down this, and it could just mean that there are different customers for DSP platforms like ours, right? We're then talking to different types of buyers as opposed to kind of the endemic programmatic buying groups that we typically talk to.
In a world that's going more and more ad blind, with ad blocking, how are you guys facing that? And when they can avoid ads, how can you balance? And the only ads that they're going to really ever interact with are ones that they think are completely genuine or have some utility.
Sure.
How do you balance the need for scale and the need to be authentic?
So the need for scale in our world right now is currently driven by just what our forecasts are in terms of new customer growth. So that's a very important metric that I want to help us always design our budgeting and our channel mix and everything else to try to hit on that when we get there. But what I've kind of internally with our creative team kind of pushed and espoused is a content-first strategy whenever possible. You hit on one of the points that I try to highlight, which is utility. I also talk about education, and I talk about entertainment. And if you can be one or all three of those things, then you have a much better chance of people actually choosing to consume whatever you've put out there, and you recover a lot of that audience. Now the ad blocking thing, true blue, either sponsored content or natively distributed content will probably combat that to a certain degree. But a lot of the same channels that we've been using to deliver ads up until this point have now evolved to be amenable to content, and that's great. I think that's a great evolution for us. But the ad blockers don't differentiate, and they'll just shut you down no matter what. So again, I wish I had a better answer for how we're dealing with this. The only thing I can say is that we are treating it as a very real problem. It's not the industry kind of blowing smoke or looking for word count or impressions. This is something where certain tech-savvy younger portions of the population, a lot of people that we're trying to reach, seem to be the most likely to employ some kind of ad blocking.
You guys want to weigh in on this?
Want to take on ad blocking?
How are you? I mean, how will it, affect your next 2 years, at the trade desk? What are you going to be doing with it?
Yeah, I mean, look, I mean, anything that affects our agency's inability to deliver their message to consumers is something we have to think about, right? We can't ignore it. It's definitely part of a problem. I mean, in today's world, when somebody has an ad blocker employed, today we just don't see the request, and we never get a request for the bid in those cases. And so it limits the scale that's available to our platform. Today, do we have a scale problem in display and some of those other channels? Probably not, like in the open auction, but it's still something very, very real that we have to pay attention to, kind of at a macro level, and maybe just on like a discussion topic level. I think someone was saying this earlier on one of the panels. It's interesting because part of the ad blocking is in response to this kind of poor experience from a user perspective, and so I think it's incumbent upon everybody in the AdTech community to hopefully make that user experience better. So I think everybody's been redirected on their mobile phone when they didn't want to get redirected, and that's part of the problem. And so for publishers, it's partially about creating a better user experience that's not overwhelming from an ad perspective, not doing things that you don't want to happen from a user experience. And I would think most publishers would take that into consideration, and most do, but some don't, and that then kind of ruins the party for everyone. And then on the buy side, there are things like frequency capping and other things that are incumbent upon us to solve for. And so I think if we can make a better user experience, it's in all of our best interest to do that. And ad blocking is in part in response to that bad experience.
Speaking of publishers, James, I'd love to get your opinion about Facebook in this space. They sort of walked into it recently, and what impact will Facebook have in automation?
It's a loaded question.
Sorry.
Look, I think Facebook, in my opinion, is focused on winning the game in mobile. I think their major competitor is Google. I think that in terms of where we sit and what I worry about, I think that clearly they have incredible depth of data around certain platforms, mobile and desktop in particular. If Facebook goes after TV dollars, which it's doing, and therefore is going after the traditional TV ecosystem, which you could argue it is, then one of the good counterpoints for the programmers who may not be able to win on depth is winning on breadth. Because the programmers and the MVPDs and others, the one thing that they can do is bring breadth to the table, whereby not only do they have the quality content, but they can also bring breadth in terms of unifying across screens, because they control the living room right now, which will, in my opinion, remain dominant for a period of time. So Facebook can also be an incredible asset to the programmers, but I'm putting my paranoia hat on and worrying about what they and Google are trying to do to the traditional ecosystem. But I think it becomes a depth versus breadth game. And if the programmers and the MVPDs can unify their inventory across those screens and deliver premium stuff at scale, again, with good context, and allow the brands to use data on that, then I think that's a decent counter to Facebook's assets.
Any thoughts on Facebook?
So I've been trying to be a data-driven thinker since I got into media. I just always thought that with interactive digital media, because we have so much to draw upon, we can know more than we can guess. And that, to me, was always the most exciting part of trying to drive into this space. The data that we willingly give to Facebook, all of us, about brands we like and don't like, movies we watch and don't watch, where we live, how many kids we have, is the most reliable data set out there, arguably. And what they've been able to do in a fairly short time with taking that data set and make it actionable for advertisers is pretty stunning. It has outperformed some of my most sort of foundational DR channels that I've been running on for years. So I think that they're onto something. I think, I give them a lot of credit for being able to create a marketing platform while still being hyper focused on the user experience. And they make a lot of changes year in and year out, some well received, some not so well received, but they're constantly tinkering with the model. And I think that is kind of the key to success in any technical platform right now is that you have to keep testing your own assumptions. So I think that combination of being very focused on the user experience and gathering useful and meaningful and predictive data is going to lead to some major, massive opportunities for them. And I think the one thing that a lot of people aren't talking about right now is Atlas. And I believe that by creating a massive ad serving platform that can draw upon the Facebook data and take it off of Facebook, I just think that's a potential game changer.
Tim, beyond transparency and viewability, what are the next sort of big themes that need to be addressed? Is it engagement? Is it conversion? Like, what follows the viewability answer as the next sort of thing to tackle?
Yeah, no, I mean, that's a good question. I mean, I think when we look kind of out at other big challenges, obviously you've got ad blocking. Viewability, I look at as more of kind of a measurement thing, as a challenge thing. Like, we have a lot of different advertisers who have that as a KPI, some hard, some soft KPIs that are centered around viewability. So I look at that as more of kind of a measurement and a KPI thing from an advertiser perspective. What's kind of next down the horizon? I don't know. It's hard to say. I'm sure there's some tough challenge around the corner. I mean, for us, it's expanding into additional channels. It's global. It is a big challenge, right? If you look at the world or take the lens back out of kind of our typical kind of looking at this through a lens of North America, there's a mobile phone in the hand of most people on the planet. Like, I think that's going to introduce some challenges for marketers to reach those people when you look at markets like China and other places where mobile is really the primary way that people consume content and thus can be delivered ads. I think there's going to be some inherent challenges with getting that message out on a global scale that we'll probably be looking to hopefully help solve for some of our agencies over the next couple of years.
What do you guys, where's your head at in terms of the shift to mobile and in this space, and is that really where scale is going to happen?
I mean, it's clearly critical. It's an obvious statement to make. I think, again, I'm looking through the lens from our client base, who are primarily delivering long-form experiences. Mobile's important, but I think less important for long-form content than a tablet or an OTT device. That may be a naive statement, but I just don't watch a lot of content, 1-hour shows on my mobile phone. But again, that's just for a very specific lens of what we're solving for. I think that mobile becomes really interesting for our client base with live streaming, actually. And I think solving for being able to provide good user experience and ad experience into live streamed environments is a very hard thing that is going to be a challenge, at least for us, in the next couple of years. I think we're seeing more and more. We saw last year, I think, a 200% increase in live streaming with regard to ad monetization. And I think the DSPs and other players are looking to, how do I get in on the action in terms of being able to bring kind of programmatic demand into those environments. So I think that's what we're focused on mobile.
Great. So we only have a couple more minutes. Any questions from the audience?
Great, we solved it.
Done. All right.
Well,
Here we go.
You guys should have a plan.
Do we have mics? There's right over here to my left.
Hi, I'm Sal Tafano. I'm a media industry veteran. I'm curious to hear the perspective on what the recent merger of Comscore and Rentrack is going to have on your particular businesses.
You want to take that one, Jake?
Yeah. I mean, I think it goes to my earlier point that if from our business, we need to provide an architecture that is agnostic to measurement. So the measurement is X, whether that's a Nielsen GRP, a Comscore rating, a Rentrack rating, a proprietary data being used as the transaction model. We have to be able to provide a platform that solves for X, not for making a bet on a specific player. And I think the merger of Comscore and Nielsen makes the point well that I don't believe there's a world where we're going to have one single player. that is going to dominate across screens. So I think it's a good thing for the industry because I think it could continue to accelerate innovation, which I think the programmers are looking for. So I see it as a net positive.
Anyone else?
Hi, Michael Waxman-Perio. Chris, I have a question for you in terms of, you talked about Facebook performing really well. How do you look at the allocation of your funds? If a channel like Facebook performs incredibly well, you're moving large amounts of money in, then you have Google as a second bucket. What's left for this large numerscape universe that everybody describes?
Well, I think to James's point, I've been staring at the Lumascape for a number of years now, and I believe, as he does, that we're going to see a bit of a shakeup. We'll see some consolidation. We may see some acquisitions. But it's my hope, as it has always been my hope. There's always been a major player in the media buying world. There's always been a dominant player where a lot of go-to, every additional dollar from any buyer would try to funnel that way, since it was the hot new thing. The fact that we have a bunch of challengers in the technology space who are out there doing it their own way, I think to another point that was made, not actually being a targeting partner as well as an inventory partner, because it's too easy for there to be a conflict of interest there. It's too easy to maybe shroud, even have some fun with the numbers. That's a real concern for marketers. So while it would be irresponsible of me to not invest to the point of diminishing returns in a channel that was proving to be effective for me in terms of driving business metrics, we always try to keep an exploratory budget, a discretionary budget to the side to continue enabling people who think they have a better answer, a better solution to the problem to test that. And there's no harm in doing that right now, which is beautiful because you get results very quickly. You can make them actionable very quickly. So that's how, even on the agency side, that's how we recommended the clients allocate their money.
Anyone else? Tim, I'll ask a question. What does this explosion of ad tech do to the internet?
I think it's a net positive for the internet to have all of this. But we talked about ad blocking earlier, but I think we've made this grand deal with the internet, all of us, that the internet is free. And then the reason that it's free is because the trade-off is we see ads. And I think ad tech hopefully supports all of that in a good way. There are obviously things that need to get weeded out. There's the kind of consolidation and removal of the bad actors from the ecosystem that will ultimately shake out. But net, I think ad tech is a positive for the internet because you've got a lot of people creating content. Those people need to be paid for their services, and the trade-off for the internet being free and having access to that content is that you see ads. And so hopefully all of us are helping to kind of promote that grand trade-off in a positive way.
Least favorite AdTech acronym?
Wow, you spring that on me right away. I'm trying to think of one that also means something else that has just confused people for years. Let me get back to me on that one. I'll keep cranking on.
Do you have one?
Least favorite AdTech acronym?
Yeah.
I don't know. There's so many of them. How about DSP, which is our category? Because there's so many different business models inside the DSP. We get lumped into that category, but there's like 10 or 12 different types of businesses that you can run and be a DSP, and ours is vastly different from a lot of those people. So.
James, do you have one?
I won't pick an acronym, but I think, and I work in this space as does many of us here, but I think the word programmatic needs to go. I think it's massively destructive to. Thank you. I would like to see it out of the lexicon in 12 months and actually have sensible conversations about the actual use case that a buyer and a seller is trying to solve for, and then use great technology to be able to do that. I can't bear conversations, and they happen every day, where someone says, well, I just want to do it programmatically. It just means absolutely nothing.
Mm-hmm. I'll pivot off that and say the same thing about native. It's not that it's a bad word, it's not that it's a bad thing, it's become pointless to use the word because so many people have so many different definitions of it.
You always have to ask, what do you mean?
What do you mean? Yeah.
And they're like, well, I'm going to stop.
I'll second those two as well.
I think we're going to stop too unless there are any more questions. All right, thanks guys. Great panel, really appreciate it.
Thanks for a great panel.